It was an ordinary night, marked on the calendar by an almost banal detail. May 14th, 2022. In a small town in the countryside, the central square was illuminated by strings of colourful lights, each blinking in warm tones, creating the atmosphere of a community party. Simple wooden tables were arranged in rows, covered with tablecloths embroidered by the hands of the local women. There was the smell of roasted corn, popular music echoing from old speakers, children running between the benches, men and women chatting about everyday life, while laughing and distracting themselves under the starry night. It was a scene of simplicity and ordinary life, without any indication that something extraordinary was about to happen. The party was for the community, one of those events where every face was known by name and every story had been told and retold on so many other similar nights. No one expected that this seemingly ordinary Saturday would turn into a milestone in human history. Then, the unthinkable happened, without warning, without prior signs in the sky or dramatic explosions. A sudden silence fell over the square. It was as if the air had been sucked into an invisible vacuum. The music stopped, not because someone turned it off, but because all eyes and all hearts were captured by the same instant. Out of nowhere, in the open field next to the square, a group of alien travelers appeared. They weren't soldiers in shining armor, nor scientists with gleaming machines. They were visitors. Strange, yes, but not hostile. Each step they took carried a mix of caution and curiosity, as if they too were unsure in the face of this encounter. Among the travelers, there was a child, fragile, small, with a delicate body and multifaceted eyes that reflected the square's lights in colors impossible to describe with human words. This child didn't seem like a fearless explorer, but rather someone shy, carrying traces of fragility in their body and, in their soul, a profound silence. They were different even from the other aliens, as if they bore an invisible mark of pain or limitation. The people in the square reacted as any community would to the unknown, with fear, murmurs, raised cell phones to record the scene. Some backed away, pulling their children by the arms. Others screamed, others simply froze. The human heart always wavers between curiosity and terror when faced with what it cannot understand. It was at that moment, at the height of the tension, that the simplest and most unexpected gesture happened. The little alien child took a hesitant step forward, extended their trembling hand, not to a leader, not to someone in uniform, but to an ordinary man, a driver from the town, known for his simple life and generous heart, who that night was just helping to organize the tables and collect chairs so everyone could have fun. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't chosen, he wasn't an authority, he was just someone present. Time stopped. The silence became absolute. The child's gesture crossed the barrier of fear and placed before that man, and the entire town, an invisible but deafening question. Will he accept? The driver looked at the extended hand, and for a moment seemed to waver. Behind him, the crowd's gazes burned with expectation and judgment. The adult aliens fidgeted, unsure about the child's boldness. And the man himself, simple, tired from the invisible daily battles, found himself facing the decision that could change everything. In that instant, the story was not yet written. The entire square seemed to hold its breath, awaiting a response. Because if that gesture were rejected, perhaps there would never be another opportunity. But if it were accepted, the impossible could become real. On that ordinary Saturday, amid colourful flags and the smell of roasted corn, the universe leaned over a small square, and the eyes of hundreds witnessed the beginning of something that would forever change how humans and aliens saw each other. And it all started with a simple party, and with an extended hand. The square, which moments before pulsed with children's laughter and the improvised rhythm of the local band, now seemed suspended in a thick silence, as if even the wind had stopped to observe. The smell of roasted corn and cotton candy still lingered in the air, but no longer aroused any appetite. What everyone saw before them surpassed any banality of daily life. A group of beings from another world was there, so close that anyone could touch them. They weren't distant images from movies, nor vague shadows in night skies. They were real, concrete presence, breathing the same air, illuminated by the same colourful lights hanging over the square. The adult aliens displayed singular forms, slender bodies, living fabrics that seemed to dress themselves, eyes that reflected light like crystal surfaces. They were different but not threatening. Each movement seemed measured, careful, as if they were aware of walking on sacred ground. Still, there was mutual distrust. On the human side, fear oscillated between the urge to flee and the irresistible impulse to stay, like witnessing a miracle. On their side, a mix of caution and surprise at the collective reaction of the community. But it wasn't the adults who drew attention, it was the child. Small, hunched over themselves, with a fragility that contrasted with the imposing presence of the others. One of their arms seemed translucent, revealing the delicate movement of internal structures, like rivers of light running under the skin. Their multifaceted eyes reflected multiple images at once, as if capable of capturing the reflection of all the people in the square from different angles. Despite their unusual appearance, there was no threat in their posture. There was only hesitation, a look of someone who wants to approach but fears rejection. And it was precisely that look that met that of a specific human. Among those present, a simple man, known to all, a town driver, someone who made a living with long hours behind the wheel, transporting people and small loads. He held no titles, had no power, but was remembered for his generosity. A single father, he had raised his son alone after his wife's early departure. He carried invisible scars from daily struggles, but kept an open soul to help whenever he could. That night, he was there not as a special guest, but as a volunteer, collecting chairs and helping to carry boxes so the party could happen in harmony. It was to him that the child extended their hand. The gesture seemed absurd. The improbable chose precisely the improbable. It wasn't the mayor standing on the stage, nor the priest observing in silence, nor the young people filming with trembling cell phones. It was an ordinary man, perhaps the most ordinary of all there. And yet, before the child's multifaceted gaze, he became the only one capable of responding to the call. Time stopped. Each breath from the crowd sounded like thunder. The man looked at the trembling hand, and for a moment seemed to retreat. He knew the weight of accepting that gesture. It wasn't just a touch. It was contact between two worlds. If he accepted, he became a bridge. If he refused, perhaps he would close a door that would never open again. His chest expanded in a deep sigh. His calloused hand, accustomed to gripping the steering wheel and carrying weight, rose slowly until it met the child's translucent hand. And when their fingers touched, the entire square shuddered with emotion. There was no explosion, no lights in the sky. There was only humanity, and something more, something no one could translate. But everyone felt. The first contact wasn't a firm grip, but a silent dance of fingers that met and parted as if seeking a common rhythm. The music, which had been silenced until then, restarted almost by accident, playing an improvised melody, but loaded with meaning. The driver and the child took a step, then another, and without any rehearsal they began to dance. It wasn't a perfect dance. There was no choreography, but it was true. The man let himself be led by the child, accepting the role reversal that many would consider unacceptable. The human adult, guided by alien innocence. And this detail, this inversion, did not go unnoticed by the crowd. Murmurs crossed the square. He's letting her lead him. Some revolted. This is dangerous, shouted one. Others cried in silence, as if they had seen something sacred manifest. Many simply couldn't believe what they saw, but no one could take their eyes off that scene. The steps were clumsy at first, but soon turned into something more harmonious. The man trusted, and the child smiled, a shy smile, almost forgotten, but beginning to bloom like a seed after a long drought. Around them, the square's lights flickered, reflecting on the child's translucent body like stars fallen to earth. Some adult aliens tried to approach, visibly uncomfortable. One of them even extended a hand to interrupt, but stopped a few centimeters away, as if something invisible had restrained them. Perhaps it was the weight of the collective emotion. Perhaps it was the recognition that something greater was happening there. The driver, humble, did not seek to be a hero. His steps were simple, his hands firm only in the intention to follow. But this gesture broke the ice, cracked the invisible walls between worlds. The sound of popular music transformed into something deeper, as if it had been resignified by the scene. The square, once the stage for a community party, now became witness to an event that would be remembered for centuries. And in that improvised dance, the entire humanity seemed to take a step along with that alien child. The initial silence of the square had been broken by the improbable dance, but it didn't take long for resistance to manifest. Human fear, so quick to awaken, soon found a voice. Parents pulled their children away, fearing that the contact could bring some invisible danger. Some older men, inflamed by distrust, advanced a few steps, shouting that this was an affront, that one couldn't trust creatures from another world. The cell phones continued raised, recording every movement, but now mixing nervous applause with boos of rejection. On the alien side, the discomfort was equally evident. An adult with a firm countenance tried to approach the child, extending their arms as if seeking to prevent something inappropriate. Their multifaceted eyes sparkled with disapproval, and their posture betrayed the tension of someone carrying responsibility for the little being. For them, perhaps that gesture was too bold, too risky, a break from what they called order. The group itself seemed divided. Some observed in silence, others murmured in their incomprehensible language, as if debating whether it was right or wrong to allow this to continue. But the human driver did not try to control. He did not lead the dance, did not seek to impose steps or command the child. On the contrary, he followed the rhythm she proposed. Each movement, even improvised, was led by the delicacy of the little being. And this detail, an adult human allowing himself to be led by an alien child, sounded like a dangerous inversion to many. Murmurs crossed the air. He's letting himself be guided. He's accepting to be led. This humility, which for some was beauty, for others was weakness. Some saw surrender, others saw devotion. But the truth is that this simple gesture began to touch invisible layers of every heart present. It was then that something unexpected happened within the alien family itself. The adult figure who was trying to contain the child stopped, hesitant. In their eyes flashed a glimmer of memory, as if that instant had awakened something ancient and painful. It was the memory of the last time they had seen the little one truly smile, before a personal tragedy that had marked their lives. Perhaps a disease that limited their movements, perhaps an accident that stole part of their joy. That child, since then, had lived in a shadow, refusing to dance, to play, to smile. And now, before an unknown human, they were daring to move again, as if rediscovering strengths that seemed lost forever. The square, divided between applause and cries of fear, was taken by a wave of silence when the child, in an almost impossible impulse, gave a graceful leap. It wasn't just a dance step. It was a movement that none of their doctors believed could happen again. A complete, unexpected leap, as if the limitation had been broken in that instant. The impact was immediate. Cries of surprise, tears flowing, cell phones falling from the hands of some who couldn't believe what they saw. For some, it was a miracle. For others, an even greater threat. But no one could deny. Something out of the ordinary was happening there. Some members of the community retreated even further, murmuring that this was witchcraft, that it wasn't natural. Others, on the contrary, knelt, moved, as if before a divine sign. The crowd was divided, like a broken mirror reflecting contradictory emotions. With every tear shed, a look of hope was born. With every cry of fear, another rose in defense of the impossible they witnessed. In the midst of all this confusion, the human driver remained firm. He did not seek applause, did not seek control. He merely offered his presence as one who sustains, silently, a bridge between two worlds. His eyes did not reflect fear, but trust. And it was this trust that fueled the child to continue smiling, continue moving, continue believing it was possible. The gesture of letting himself be led turned into a symbol. The humble human adult showed that following was not losing, but allowing something greater to manifest. And gradually, even those who shouted against the contact began to hesitate. After all, they weren't facing an invasion. They were facing a child who, for the first time in a long time, dared to dance. The square breathed heavily, as if each person struggled with their own beliefs. Some clutched rosaries, others raised cameras, others simply cried in silence. The night advanced, but no one could leave. They were trapped in that instant, captives of a scene that would never be forgotten. And at the center of it all, the invisible lesson grew. Fear divides, but humility unites. Before we continue, if this story is already touching your heart, take the opportunity to subscribe to this channel. Leave your like and comment below. I follow the truth. This strengthens our community and helps us bring more transformative stories like this to the world. The unexpected leap of the alien child lingered in the collective memory, like a spark of light crossing a deep darkness. The entire square fell silent, not out of fear this time, but out of reverence. The impossible had just happened before hundreds of witnesses. The cell phones, still recording, captured not just an extraordinary scene, but also the raw emotion stamped on every human and alien face. And then came the smile. Small, shy, almost childlike in its simplicity, but loaded with immense weight. It was the first true smile that alien child had given in a long time. A smile that didn't ask for approval, that didn't seek to be perfect. It was just the pure reflection of a moment when the soul felt free. The human driver, still holding hands with the little being, felt his heart race. He did not seek recognition. There was no pretense of glory in him. His teary eyes revealed only a mix of gratitude and astonishment. With a delicate gesture, he bent down and returned the child to the arms of their family. He didn't want to prolong the contact beyond what was necessary, didn't want to show off as a hero. He merely recognized that that instant didn't belong to him. It was the child's. It was the community's. It was for all who witnessed. The adult alien, who had earlier tried to contain the scene, hesitated. Their arms trembled as they received the little one back, and for a moment they seemed not to know what to do. There was an internal conflict, the desire to protect in contrast with the fear of allowing. But the memory of the newly born smile shook any certainty. In their rigid countenance, a crack appeared, as if they finally admitted they had fought against something that could no longer be contained. The transformation wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about a leap or a recovered movement. It was something deeper, an inner liberation. The simple gesture of a human accepting to be led had opened an invisible door, awakening in the child a courage that seemed dormant under layers of pain. And like every true gesture, its strength spread. The first signs came from the crowd. Those who had been retreating began to take timid steps closer. People who had shouted in rejection now observed in silence, taken by emotion. Some parents who had pulled their children away allowed them to approach again, curious about the scene. And the human children, without the weight of adult fears, were the first to smile and extend their hands. Gradually, the atmosphere of fear dissolved. What was once tension turned into hope. The contrast was stark. The square, illuminated by flags and colourful lights, once a stage of division, now converted into a space of union. The tears flowing from faces were not of despair, but of relief. It was as if everyone understood, in silence, that they were before something greater than themselves. The gesture of returning the child to the family, done with such humility by the driver, was interpreted as a sign. He didn't want to be the protagonist, didn't want power. He just wanted to participate, just to allow life to flourish. This humility contrasted with the haughtiness of so many who sought to control the moment. And it was exactly that which gave strength to the gesture. The adult alien, touched by memories of pain, let out a heavy sigh. Their eyes, once firm and distant, now filled with tears. It was impossible to deny the evidence. Their child, or daughter, had rediscovered something lost. And this didn't happen through science, technology, or authority. It happened through the simplicity of a human gesture, a silent surrender. The human community, divided until then, began to reorganize around this new understanding. Some still resisted, murmuring doubts, but they were fewer and fewer. The majority was already taken by an almost sacred reverence. They weren't just before aliens, they were before a sign that worlds so different could touch without destruction. The child's smile echoed stronger than any speech. It was as if it said, "The bridge is possible." And the driver, even returning to the anonymity of his simplicity, became a living symbol that greatness is not needed to provoke a silent revolution. At the end of the night, the square breathed differently. There was no longer the sense of threat that had dominated the first minutes. There was a different silence, the silence of respect, of contemplation. And in that silence, each person carried within themselves the certainty that they had witnessed not just an encounter between species, but a collective transformation. The impossible had become possible. The improbable had manifested, and all because of a simple gesture, accepting the extended hand. The night advanced, but no one had the courage to end the party. What had started as a community celebration was no longer just a gathering among neighbors. It was a milestone in the silent history of humanity. However, the most surprising moment was still to come. Not in the square illuminated by colorful flags, but in the discreet retreat that followed. After the dance and the child's smile, the adult aliens approached the human driver. There was no longer the same rigidity in their countenance, nor the urgency to contain the little one's boldness. There was respect, curiosity, and even a certain disconcert before what they had witnessed. With gentle gestures, they invited the driver to step away for a few moments from the crowd. The community, still in ecstasy, observed from afar, as if watching the conclusion of a mystery that was just beginning to unfold. The driver, hesitant, accepted. He walked beside those beings to a more reserved space, under the shadow of ancient trees surrounding the square. There, the silence was even deeper, broken only by the distant sound of music that gradually resumed in the center of the event. It was then that, in words translated by a strange device, the aliens addressed him a question that carried as much weight as tenderness. "Who are you?" He blinked, confused. He didn't know how to respond to something so simple and at the same time so profound. His tired eyes reflected humility when he finally said, "I'm just a driver from this town. Nothing more than that." This response fell among them like a silent thunderbolt. The aliens looked at each other, as if they couldn't believe it. For them, it was almost unthinkable that someone without titles, without technical knowledge or leadership position, had provoked such a deep change in their child. They perhaps expected to hear that he was a spiritual leader, a renowned scientist, a chosen one among his own. But no, he was just someone ordinary, and it was exactly that simplicity that touched even deeper. With a voice choked by emotion, the adult alien who seemed responsible for the child finally admitted, "You have no idea. Since a terrible accident, our little one never smiled again, never moved with such freedom again. We no longer believed this was possible. We tried everything, and yet it took just one gesture from you." The words didn't complete themselves. The silence that followed said more than any explanation. The driver, humble, merely shook his head, not feeling ownership of any of that. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he replied sincerely. "I just accepted to give my hand and follow the step that was offered to me." These words echoed like a lesson, not just for the aliens, but for any human who could hear them, because in them was hidden a simple and transformative truth. The extraordinary doesn't arise from grandeur, but from humility. You don't need to conquer stars to change the universe. Sometimes it's enough to accept to follow the innocent step of a child. The aliens, touched, admitted something they rarely said aloud, that even among them, in their advanced culture, they created invisible prisons. The rigidity of traditions, the weight of expectations, the constant control, all this had imprisoned their little being in a cell without bars. And in that instant, they realized they had learned more in a few minutes with a simple human than in years of effort. The driver, in turn, did not seek recognition. His calloused hands, accustomed to carrying weight and holding the steering wheel, trembled slightly. He knew his life would return to the ordinary, to daily work, to the invisible struggles that no one applauded. But at the same time, he understood that he had participated in something greater, something not measured in fame or power, and so, before that silent conversation under the trees, a new message began to form. The true call to change was not for the aliens, nor for the humans, but for both. It was an invitation to recognize that greatness is not in the hands of those who dominate, but of those who know how to surrender to the simple. When they returned to the square, they didn't need to announce anything. The transformed look on the aliens' faces already said everything. There was a new reverence there, not for a hero, but for a gesture. And that night, the invisible message spread like a breeze. The extraordinary is born from simplicity. The sun of the following morning seemed brighter than ever, as if even nature itself had decided to celebrate what had happened the night before. The square, still decorated with colourful flags and remnants of the community party, silently held the traces of an unforgettable moment. There were forgotten plastic cups on the tables, scattered remains of roasted corn on the ground, and the distant echo of the music that, the previous evening, had cradled both joy and fear. But now, in that dawn, the environment breathed a different air, light, serene, and loaded with expectation. When the first residents gathered again, they didn't know exactly what to expect. Some arrived curious, others skeptical, and many simply felt they couldn't miss the unfolding of something so unprecedented. It was then that, to general surprise, the aliens returned. This time, not with the caution of the previous night, but with a more confident presence. There was no longer the weight of fear separating them from the community. They walked among the humans like visitors who had been accepted. At the center of this return was the alien child. Their multifaceted eyes reflected the soft light of the morning sun, and their posture was different. There was lightness in their movements, a living curiosity in every gesture. For the first time in a long time, they didn't seem to hide behind the adult's protection. And what happened next surprised everyone. The child pointed to the other human children playing in the square and, with a simple gesture, asked to join them. There was a moment of hesitation. Some parents, still insecure, held their children firmly. But soon, as if obeying an invisible order, they let them approach. And so, in a few minutes, something extraordinary unfolded before the community's eyes. Human children and the alien child began to play together. At first shy, testing limits, observing each other with curiosity. But soon, as only children know how, they broke all barriers. They shared toys, ran around the square, invented improvised games. The human children taught dance steps, laughed and shouted with spontaneity, while the alien child, in response, showed movements from their own culture, light spins, elegant gestures that seemed to mimic the fluidity of stars in the sky. The square filled with laughter. The childish sound was so strong that even the adults, once trapped in fear, found themselves infected. Little by little, people began to approach, not to contain, but to observe, applaud, smile. What had been a scene of tension and resistance now transformed into a stage of union and joy. The adult alien, responsible for the child, observed from afar. Their eyes carried a mix of surprise and emotion. For the first time, they didn't see fragility or pain in the little being, but freedom. The pride they felt wasn't for perfect performance, but for the courage to allow themselves to play. It was a silent lesson. Perhaps the true role of a father, a mother, a guide is not to lead toward perfection, but to release toward freedom. And this lesson also touched the humans present. Many began to realize that their fears had no foundation. They weren't facing enemies, but beings equally capable of laughing, playing, getting emotional. The community understood in real time that the future could be built not from political treaties or formal agreements, but from the shared innocence of children. The human driver, the improbable protagonist of the previous night, remained silent. Leaning against one of the trees surrounding the square, he no longer needed to be at the center. What he had done had already fulfilled its role. Now, he just observed, moved, while the impossible became every day before his eyes. In his chest, a rare peace blossomed. The certainty that, no matter how simple his life was, he had become part of something much greater. And that day, everyone understood that the true revolution hadn't been the aliens landing, nor the tension of the first dance. The true revolution was happening there, in the way the children laughed together. Because if they could play without fear, what else could prevent adults from learning to trust? As the sun began to set, tinting the sky with golden and orange tones, the square was full again. But now not with division, but with communion. Aliens and humans side by side shared food, music, and stories. What once seemed impossible began to become normal. And in the midst of all this, the adult alien allowed themselves to smile. Not the contained smile of someone who needs to maintain order, but the true smile of someone who finally understands that life is greater when the reins are loosened. For the first time, they didn't feel pride in rigidity or control, but in freedom. And so in that small town, the improbable happened. Two worlds met, and instead of drifting apart, learned to laugh together. The sunset arrived, bringing with it the soft coolness of the wind and the shine of the stars. The square that had transformed into a stage of union seemed to breathe in a new rhythm. The sun, already low, spread golden reflections over the still hanging colourful flags, and the music, which once marked only a community party, now sounded like the soundtrack of a universal celebration. The tension of the previous night seemed distant, almost a bad dream dissipated by the light of day. In the centre of the square, the humans organised a circle, clapping in rhythm to a simple melody. Children ran from side to side, mixing clumsy steps with spontaneous laughter. It was then that the alien child, until then just playing shyly, asked to enter the circle. The gesture made the crowd silent for a few moments. No one dared to stop it. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. The human driver, the one who had accepted the hand the previous night, was called by the children's own gazes. He hesitated, but soon approached and entered the circle, standing side by side with the little being from another world. And when the music began to swell, the two took the first steps. The human did not lead, as always. He merely followed, allowing the child to guide, and it was then that it happened. Before everyone, the alien child began to dance in a way never seen. Their movements were fluid, graceful, full of lightness. Their feet, once limited, glided across the ground in spins and leaps that defied any medical diagnosis. And at the height of the dance, they performed something that seemed impossible. A complete, perfect leap that ended in an elegant spin, as if floating for a few seconds in the air. The square exploded in applause. People cried openly, some hugged without even knowing each other. It was as if each tear was a way to thank for being alive in that instant, for witnessing something that would never be repeated in the same way. And it wasn't just the physical movement that surprised. In an unexpected gesture, the child raised their voice and sang a note. It wasn't a human song, but a crystalline, pure sound that seemed to vibrate directly in the hearts. For some, it sounded like music, for others like prayer. The fact is that everyone felt the same thing. An indescribable peace took over the environment, as if the universe had stopped for a few seconds just to listen. The adult aliens, moved, could no longer hold back tears. What they saw before them was more than a child dancing. It was a miracle. It was living proof that freedom and affection could heal what rigidity never could. It was at that moment that the adult alien, responsible for the little one, took a step forward. The crowd silenced, awaiting their words. Their voice, translated by the same strange device from the previous night, echoed firm and emotional. Today I learned that leading is not always guiding. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to be led. And following a child can be more important than teaching them to follow. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Many humans turned to the driver, recognizing his humility. But he, without lifting his chin, bowed his head in a sign of respect. He did not seek glory, did not seek recognition. He had merely accepted a gesture. And that was the great revelation. The true revolution did not arise from technology, nor from force, nor from science. It arose from the humility of a human who accepted to be led, and from the courage of a child who dared to take a step. The crowd, taken by emotion, exploded again in applause. There was no more fear, no more distrust. There, under the golden sky, two worlds recognized each other as equals. In that instant, everyone understood. Transformation does not begin in great achievements, but in simple gestures. And that gesture, in that small town, had already changed the universe. When night finally fell, bringing with it the soft coolness of the wind and the shine of the stars, the square was no longer just a community space in a small town. It had become a sacred place, where the improbable had happened before hundreds of witnesses. The memory of that day would be carried not only in the cell phones that recorded every detail, but in the hearts that would never forget the lived transformation. There were no political speeches, no signed treaties. It wasn't the leaders or authorities who defined the course of history. It was a simple party with colourful flags, roasted corn, and popular music. It was the innocence of an alien child who dared to extend their hand, and the humility of a human man who dared to accept it. This gesture, so small at first glance, became the seed of a cosmic change. The driver returned to his ordinary life, to the steering wheel awaiting him on the town's streets, to the bills and responsibilities that would never disappear. He did not seek fame, nor did he want to become a symbol of something greater, but deep in his soul, he knew he had participated in an event that transcended generations. Whenever he closed his eyes, he would remember the translucent hand holding his, the shy smile transforming into freedom, the impossible leap that tore through the barriers of disbelief. And the alien child? They never went back to being the same. That smile born that night would become permanent. Their dance would be remembered not as a display of skill, but as a testimony of courage. Whenever they moved their feet, they reminded the world that, even after pain and limitation, it was possible to start over. The lesson that remained engraved was clear. It is not great achievements that change the universe, but simple gestures that cross the heart. Sometimes it's enough just to accept the extended hand, even when fear whispers that it's dangerous. Sometimes the greatest power is not in leading, but in letting yourself be led. In that small town, humans and aliens discovered something that not even the wisest could explain: that true union is born from humility and innocence. And this discovery needed no complex translations. It was enough to look at a circle of children playing together to understand. Perhaps in the future, treaties will be signed, ships will travel between stars, and technologies will be shared. But none of that will surpass what happened that night. Because before any agreement, before any advance, it was a simple gesture that opened the door. And that's why, when we look at the stars, we should remember the universe doesn't transform just with wars, science, or power. It transforms when someone dares to give a hand and follow an innocent step. Sometimes, the greatest power in the universe is not in conquering stars, but in knowing when to give a hand and follow an innocent step. If you believe that true transformation begins in simple gestures, leave your like, share this video, and write in the comments, "I choose to follow." This is the way to spread this message and be part of a community that believes in union beyond barriers.